"They're right, you know. She's too heavy. She won't last a week." The words floated over the April morning like flies circling something wounded. Hattie Blackwell felt them land, sharp, familiar, unwelcome. 30 years of hearing variations of the same judgment had taught her not to flinch, but even so, the sting traveled down her spine. Independence! Missouri bustled with noise as families prepared their wagons for the long road toward Oregon. Horses snorted, children cried, pots clanged. But beneath all the chaos, beneath all the movement, the low hum of gossip followed her like a shadow. "That's her, that Boston school teacher. The fat one. A burden before we've even started." Hattie kept her hands tight around the handle of her small travel trunk. She had crossed half the continent already by train and riverboat to get here, chasing the promise of a new life in Oregon City. A life where her worth might be measured by her mind and her kindness, not the width of her waist. Captain Brock approached with the grim expression of a man preparing to deliver an unpleasant truth. "Miss Blackwell," he began, "I'm responsible for the safety of every soul who joins this train. The pace is grueling, the mountains unforgiving. I fear your condition places you in danger, and frankly, puts the rest of us at risk." The humiliation rose hot in her throat, but before she could defend herself, a deep voice, steady as a river cutting through stone, cut the air. "She's with me." Silence rolled across the wagon yard like a thundercloud. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He was enormous, broad-shouldered, tall as a pine, wrapped in buckskins worn by harsher winds than these. His beard framed a jaw carved from stubborn rock, and his gray eyes held the cold intelligence of a man who had learned to survive by noticing everything. "Nathan Cross," he said simply, "scout for the Williamson party." Brock narrowed his eyes. "You're claiming responsibility for her?" "I am," Nathan replied, "and she's making this journey. If you intend to turn her away, then you'll turn me as well." A ripple moved through the onlookers, a mix of surprise and irritation. Hattie could only stare. No man had stepped between her and cruelty since childhood. No man had looked at her without derision or pity in years. And yet this stranger, this mountain of a man, spoke as though her right to exist on this trail was beyond question. Nathan turned to her, voice softer. "Miss Blackwell, you still wish to go west?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes, I do." He nodded once. "Then you will." And for the first time since arriving at Independence, Hattie felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Possibility. The wagon train rolled westward beneath a sky vast enough to swallow every fear a person carried, though Hattie soon discovered that some fears clung tighter than others. The first days set the rhythm. Dawn packing, long miles on foot beside groaning wheels, nights spent beneath quilts that never quite held back the prairie wind. Every step forced her body to reckon with the truth of the trail. This was no gentle teacher's stroll through Boston's cobbled lanes. This was survival carved into earth and bone. And still she endured. But endurance did not hush the whispers. "She's slowing us down. She'll break an axle if she tries to ride. She'll drain the ration barrels before we make it past Kansas." Some did not bother whispering. One afternoon, as the heat shimmered off the plains, two young men, brothers with more bravado than sense, walked past Hattie, loud enough for half the train to hear. "Reckon we ought to weigh her against a buffalo," the older one jeered. "Buffalo'd lose," the younger snorted. Laughter followed like a kicked-up dust cloud. It trailed Hattie until she felt grit behind her eyes. She kept walking, shoulders back, chin level, pride the only armor she owned. Later that evening, as she washed the dust from her hands at the river, she sensed movement behind her. She tensed, then relaxed. Nathan's steps were heavy but quiet, a man accustomed to forests, not civilized roads. "How many today?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "How many what?" He cupped water in his hands and drank. "Insults." Her breath caught. "I don't keep count." But the truth was, she did, always had, since girlhood, since every schoolyard taunt, every dressmaker's sneer, every man who recoiled at the idea of courting a woman who did not fit neatly into the narrow world allotted to femininity. Nathan studied her, not with pity, but with the attentive patience of someone who had learned long ago that words could be wounds. "Most people on this trail came west running from something," he said. "A debt, a crime, a past they couldn't escape. But you, what drove you across the country alone?" She hesitated. No one had ever asked with genuine curiosity. "My mother died when I was 12, she said quietly. "My father remarried quickly, a woman who believed a girl of my size was a blemish on her household. I spent years being scolded, corrected, hidden. Books became my refuge. Teaching became my way out. And when the offer came from Oregon City," she paused, voice tightening, "I thought perhaps there was a place where people judged me by my skill, not my silhouette." Nathan nodded slowly. "You know what I see when I look at you?" Here it comes, she thought. Another variation of too big, too slow, too much. "A woman with spine," Nathan finished. "Someone who keeps walking long after insult and exhaustion would have broken others. That's worth more than any town's opinion." The words landed gently but firmly, like a hand laid across her back, steadying her. But not everyone shared his view. By week 2, the Williamson family, kind as they were, had grown uneasy over the murmurs directed at them for hosting Hattie. Mrs. Williamson tried to hide her discomfort, but on the morning of the river ford, she approached Hattie with trembling hands. "We don't mind your company, dear," she said softly. "Truly, we don't. But people are saying we're putting ourselves at risk by keeping you with us. My children, well, I can't afford trouble." Hattie swallowed the ache that rose in her throat. "Of course," she whispered. "I understand completely." She didn't, not really. Or perhaps she understood too well. Her entire life had been a quiet exercise in not being anyone's burden. Yet even here, where everyone dragged their own fears and failures across the prairie, she was cast as the weight pulling the world backward. When Nathan heard, his face darkened with a storm she'd never seen before. "They're afraid," he said, "afraid of hardship, afraid of blame, afraid of anything that challenges their idea of what survival looks like. But fear doesn't get to dictate your worth." It should have comforted her. Instead, the trail's long miles made his words feel like a distant campfire, glimpsed, but too far to warm chilled bones. Late that afternoon, as thunderheads rolled along the horizon and the wagon train halted to prepare for crossing the Kaw River, Captain Brock approached her once more. "Miss Blackwell," he said curtly, "this next portion is dangerous. If you cannot cross with the wagons, I'll have to leave you until the rest of us are safely across. You'll have to fend for yourself until then." Her heart pounded. "I paid my full passage." "And I've let you remain despite misgivings," he snapped. "I've been more than patient." Behind them, Thunder rumbled, deep and ominous. Hattie steadied her breath. "I will cross, Captain. I'll do whatever is required." He shook his head. "I doubt that. But we'll see. For now, stay out of the way." He walked off, and for the first time since leaving Missouri, Hattie felt the icy hand of fear close around her ribs. The river was rising, the sky was darkening, and the one thing she'd vowed to prove, that she could survive, was about to be tested far sooner than she'd imagined. The Kaw River churned like a living thing, brown, swollen, angry. Spring runoff had transformed it into a rolling wall of cold water, and the swollen current slapped hard against wagon wheels as families prepared to cross. Thunder boomed overhead, shaking the air itself. The storm was coming faster now. Hattie stood at the riverbank, skirts whipping around her legs, watching as the first wagons entered the ford. Water surged up to the wheel spokes, then to the horses' flanks. The drivers shouted above the roar, urging their teams forward. Everyone moved with urgency, knowing delays could cost lives. She swallowed hard. This was the moment Captain Brock had warned her of, the first real test of the trail, and she already sensed she was failing in his eyes before she'd taken a single step. Nathan approached from behind, his boots squelching in the mud. "River's mean today," he said quietly. "Fast enough to knock a man off his feet if he isn't careful." Hattie nodded, throat tight. "Captain Brock says I can't ride a wagon across. Says my weight makes it dangerous." Nathan's jaw flexed. "He's wrong, but arguing won't change anything now." Children cried, horses screamed, wind ripped the canvas covers on the wagons, and the sky kept lowering, boiling dark and heavy with rain. When Hattie stepped toward the nearest wagon, Captain Brock intercepted her. "No," he barked. "That wagon's at capacity. You walk or you wait." "Wait where?" Hattie demanded, her voice cracking. "On this side of the river? During a storm?" "That's not my concern," Brock snapped. "You insisted on making this journey. It's time you proved you can handle it." A few travelers nearby exchanged uneasy glances. Others stared openly, as though waiting for the spectacle of her humiliation. Hattie's pulse hammered. She looked at the water, rushing, violent, rising. She knew deep in her bones that if she entered that river alone, it might claim her. Nathan stepped between her and Brock, towering over the wagon master. "You've made your point," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now I'll make mine." Brock glared. "And what point is that?" "That she crosses with the train," Nathan said, "even if I have to take her across myself." The murmurs rose instantly, gasps, whispers, disbelief. "You can't do that, Cross," Brock scoffed. "She's too heavy. You'll drown yourselves trying." Nathan didn't break eye contact. "I know this river. I've crossed it a dozen times, and I'm strong enough to carry more than her. You want the train moving? Then stand aside." Brock opened his mouth to argue, but a crack of lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening boom. The storm was nearly on top of them. He backed down. Nathan turned to Hattie. "Do you trust me?" he asked. She had never been asked that question without mockery, never by a man who saw her as something other than burden or embarrassment. Seeing his steady expression now, calm, certain, felt like a lifeline thrown across the current. "Yes," she whispered. "I do." Nathan nodded once, then bent and swept her up, not awkwardly, not with struggle, but with a practiced strength that stole her breath. For one stunned moment, Hattie felt weightless, held securely against his chest as though she belonged there. "Put your arms around my neck," Nathan said. "Hold tight." She did. He stepped into the river. At once, the current slammed against him, sending sheets of icy water spraying into their faces. Nathan staggered a half step, but did not stop. Every muscle in his body tightened as he leaned forward, thighs braced against the pull, shoulders straining against the force of the river. People on the bank fell silent. Even the storm seemed to pause. Hattie buried her face into Nathan's shoulder, feeling the raw power of the current tugging at him. "Nathan, if we fall—" "We won't," he growled, tightening his grip around her. "I've got you." Step by grueling step, he moved forward, planting his boots deep into the riverbed, shifting his weight with practiced instinct. Water rose to his waist, then his ribs, swirling with deadly force. A log crashed downstream, barely missing them. Someone screamed, "Cross!" Captain Brock shouted. "Fall back! Fall back!" Nathan ignored him. Thunder cracked again. Rain began to fall, cold, sharp, slanting sideways. Hattie clung to him, trembling uncontrollably, but Nathan did not falter. Inch by inch, he carved through the river. When the current surged hard enough to shove him sideways, he adjusted. When the water rose high enough to soak her completely, he shielded her with his body. And then, finally, his boot struck solid ground. The crowd on the western bank erupted into shouts. Nathan trudged up the bank, drenched, panting, but never loosening his grip on her. When he reached level ground, he set Hattie gently on her feet. Her legs quivered beneath her. She swayed. Nathan caught her shoulders. "Easy," he murmured. "You're safe now." She looked up at him, water streaming from his hair, breath heaving, eyes fierce, and something inside her shifted, irrevocable. "You carried me?" she whispered, astonished. "No," Nathan said quietly, brushing wet strands of hair from her cheek. "I carried a woman strong enough to walk every mile of this trail, but forced to prove her worth at every turn. Don't mistake other people's cruelty for your weakness." Behind them, families stared, some ashamed, some stunned, others looking at Hattie with new recognition. For a moment, the storm faded to nothing. There were only two people standing on the riverbank, one who had always believed she was too heavy to be loved or defended, and one who had just proven her wrong. Thunder rumbled again, and the wagon train resumed preparing to cross. But nothing would ever be the same. The days after the river crossing reshaped the wagon train in ways no one had expected. News of what Nathan had done, of the mountain man who carried a full-grown woman through a raging river while the rest of the train watched from safety, spread along the line faster than the storm that had chased them. Some recounted it with awe, others with embarrassment, a few with grudging admiration. But one truth settled over everyone like dust on a dry road. Hattie Blackwell had survived what many would not have dared attempt. For the first time since leaving Missouri, no one openly mocked her. But silence did not erase years of scorn. On the morning after the crossing, Hattie found herself lingering near the fire while the Williamsons packed their wagon. Mrs. Williamson approached with a bundle of biscuits wrapped in cloth. "These are for you," she said softly. "You helped carry heat for my children during the cold nights. I should have defended you more." Hattie accepted the bundle gently. "Thank you. And your family has been kind." Mrs. Williamson lowered her voice. "Kindness is easy when others approve. True kindness takes courage. I'm sorry it took me so long to find mine." Hattie smiled, small, soft, genuine. "Then we're both learning," she said. Nathan appeared a moment later, his long stride slow and purposeful, as though he didn't want to startle her. He carried her small trunk across one shoulder as if it weighed nothing at all. When he reached her, he lowered it with careful precision, then looked at her in a way that felt like more than mere concern. "Your feet holding up?" he asked. "They're sore," Hattie admitted, "but I'm managing." Nathan didn't smile often, but when he did, it came from somewhere deep, a brief and quiet thing that warmed the air around him. "I never doubted you would." They began walking together, Hattie beside the Williamson wagon, Nathan scouting but staying close for the first part of the day. He adjusted his pace to match hers, saying nothing about the fact that her stride was shorter and her step slower at the start of each morning. The silence between them wasn't strained. It was companionable, an exchange without words, born from everything that had already happened. "You don't need to stay with me," Hattie said after a while, though part of her hoped he would continue. "I know you have duties." Nathan looked down at her. "I do. And right now my duty is making sure you don't get trampled by someone's runaway ox team, or wander into rattlesnake grass, or get blamed for slowing down the line when you haven't slowed it at all." She laughed despite herself. "I suppose that's practical." "Everything on the trail is," Nathan replied, "feelings included." Hattie blinked. "Feelings?" Nathan didn't elaborate. He simply started walking again, and she followed. That afternoon, trouble found them in the form of a toppled wagon. The Johnson family's lead horse had spooked and bolted, tipping the wagon onto its side and scattering blankets, tools, and dried goods across the prairie. Mrs. Johnson sat on the ground, crying, clutching her sprained wrist while her husband wrestled with the fallen canvas. Hattie reacted before she even thought. She rushed to them, kneeling beside Mrs. Johnson. "Let me see," she said softly, examining the swollen wrist with gentle but efficient hands. "It's not broken, just strained. We need to wrap it, and you need to keep weight off it." Mrs. Johnson sniffed. "I still have to help reset the wagon. There's too much to do." "I can help," Hattie said simply, and she did. She hauled bedding, stacked crates, helped reset the rear wheel, lifted one of the heavy wooden chests while Mr. Johnson fixed the axle. Her broad shoulders and solid frame made the work far easier than other women, or some men, could have managed. She didn't notice that Nathan had stopped scouting and stood watching her work, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When the Johnson wagon was righted, Mr. Johnson approached Hattie, wiping sweat from his brow. "Miss Blackwell," he said, voice thick with gratitude, "I judged you wrongly at the start. You're strong as a team horse and twice as steady. We couldn't have managed without you." Hattie smiled, breathless but pleased. "We all need help sometimes. I'm glad I could offer mine." Later, as the wagons creaked westward again, Nathan fell into step beside her. "You surprise them," he said. "I suppose I do," Hattie replied, though her tone carried the exhaustion of years. "People expect so little from women who look like me. Anything I do feels like a revelation to them." Nathan's gaze softened. "They see only the shape of your body. I see the shape of your spirit. There's a difference." Her steps faltered. "Nathan, people don't speak to me like that." "They should," he said simply. That evening at camp, Nathan brought her a cup of hot coffee before returning to his own fire. Hattie accepted it gratefully, savoring the warmth in her hands. Before he walked away, he hesitated. "I want you to know something," he said finally. "Yesterday, When I carried you across that river, it wasn't weakness that weighed on me. It was fear." "Fear?" she echoed. "That I wouldn't get you across, that I might lose you to the current." His voice dipped, threads of vulnerability woven through the gravel. "I've carried men through worse, but your loss would have mattered." Her breath caught. "Nathan." He shook his head lightly, as though brushing away his own honesty. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow will be harder." But Hattie didn't sleep quickly, not because of fear or soreness or doubt, but because of something far more unsettling, far more hopeful. A man had feared losing her. A man had carried her without shame. A man saw strength in her where others saw burden. As the night deepened, Hattie pressed a hand to her chest, feeling a pulse that was no longer only her own. Something was changing. By the 6th week on the trail, the rhythm of the journey had etched itself into Hattie's bones. Dawn meant cold fingers, warm fires, and the creak of wagon wheels breaking the quiet. Midday meant dust in her throat and blistering plains that shimmered like glass. Night meant exhaustion so deep she fell asleep before finishing her prayers. But it also meant something else now. Nathan Cross. He checked on her morning and evening, walked beside her when he could spare the time, sought her out at campfires. He carried the heavier water barrels without being asked. He carved her a wooden eating spoon when hers cracked. He corrected the young men who mocked her until their whispers dried up completely. The wagon train had begun to notice, and not everyone approved. One evening, as Hattie washed laundry at a shallow creek, she overheard Mrs. Carlyle, the sharp-tongued widow who never liked her, speaking in her usual hissing whisper. "It isn't proper," Mrs. Carlyle said, folding her arms. "A mountain man like him, always hovering around that woman, it's indecent." Her companion muttered, "It's odd is what it is." "Odd? It's embarrassing," the widow snapped. "She ought to be grateful anyone tolerates her. Instead, she clings to the one man who can't tell her no." Hattie stiffened, the wet shirt in her hands slipping back into the creek. Clings? Could they not see she could barely bring herself to look Nathan full in the eye some days because of how he unsettled her? Before she could retreat, a shadow fell over her. Nathan. He crouched beside her, retrieving the shirt she'd dropped. His hands rinsed the fabric with calm precision. "You heard them," he said quietly. Hattie stared at the water. "People talk." "They talk because they're afraid of what they don't understand," Nathan replied. "Most folks on this trail ain't seen a woman with your strength or one with your courage." Her breath hitched. "Courage? Nathan, I'm terrified half the time." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said. "It's the choice to keep walking anyway." She looked up then and immediately wished she hadn't. The way Nathan stared at her made her heart thump painfully, as though her body had forgotten how to stay calm in his presence. But before either of them could speak, trouble arrived. A hard-riding scout galloped into camp, shouting breathlessly, "Raiders! Coming fast from the north!" Chaos exploded. Mothers swooped up children. Men grabbed rifles. The air crackled as shouts filled the camp. "Sioux!" someone yelled. "No!" the scout gasped, shaking his head. "White men! Bandits!" Nathan surged to his feet. "How many?" 12, maybe 15. He swore under his breath, then turned to Hattie with a sharpness she'd never seen aimed her way. "Go to the Williamson wagon. Stay inside. Do not come out unless I come for you." Her throat tightened. "Nathan, this isn't a request," he said. "Go, now." Hattie obeyed, though fear clawed at her chest. Inside the wagon, the Williamson children huddled, wide-eyed. "Is it Indians?" little Claire whimpered. "No, sweetheart," Hattie whispered, pulling her close. "But you'll be safe. All of you, stay low." Gunshots cracked in the distance. Horses screamed, more shouting. Hattie's pulse drummed in her ears. Minutes stretched like hours. She whispered prayers over and over, clutching the children tight, fighting the urge to run outside and find Nathan. But she stayed. Nathan had asked her to trust him, and she would. When silence finally fell, it was heavy and cold. The wagon canvas lifted. Nathan, bloody, bruised, but alive. Her heart nearly gave out. "Come on," he said quietly. "It's over." Hattie stepped onto the ground and gasped. Men lay bound in the dust. Brock and several others stood watch. One bandit groaned where Nathan had clearly hit him hard enough to end the fight. "They're alive," Nathan said, seeing her expression. "Brock wants to turn them in at the next post instead of hanging them outright." "You're hurt," she whispered. "It's nothing." It wasn't nothing. Blood seeped through his shirt at the shoulder, and a bruise darkened his jaw. She reached out instinctively and then froze, hand halfway to his face. Nathan took her hand gently. "I'm all right," he said, "and you did exactly what I asked. Thank you." She swallowed, emotion tightening her throat. "I was so afraid." "I wasn't," Nathan said softly, "because I knew you were safe." The words hit harder than the gunfire. Later that night, after the bandits had been secured and the campfire dimmed, Nathan found her sitting alone beneath the stars, knees pulled to her chest. "You're shaking," he murmured, sitting beside her. "I'm angry," Hattie whispered. "Not at you, at myself. I hate hiding while others fight." Nathan's voice softened. "Hattie?" "No," she said, wiping her cheeks. "Please let me finish. My whole life, people have treated me like I'm fragile, like I'm something to be protected or put aside. Even today, your tone changed. Your eyes changed. As if you thought I would break." He turned, studying her closely. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met," he said. "But I've seen what bullets do, what knives do, and the thought of anything harming you." His voice cracked. I couldn't bear it. The honesty in his tone broke something in her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do I matter so much to you?" Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, breathing hard as though the truth was fighting its way out. "Because I lost someone once," he said quietly. "My sister Anna, mocked for her size, dismissed, told she didn't matter. And when she needed help the most, no one protected her, not even me. But you remind me of the strength she had, and the strength she was never allowed to show." Hattie's breath caught. "Nathan!" He turned then, eyes fierce, voice breaking with something deeper than grief. "But somewhere along the way, somewhere between Missouri and here, I stopped helping you for Anna's sake." Her heart pounded. "I started helping you," he whispered, "because I can't imagine not doing so. Because when you look at me, I feel like a man again. Because you make this whole brutal journey feel like it's leading somewhere worth going." Hattie felt her vision blur. Nathan's voice lowered. "And because if anything happened to you today, I wouldn't have survived it." The wind stilled. The night held its breath. "Nathan," she said, voice trembling, "are you telling me—" He didn't let her finish. "I'm telling you," he said, "that I'm falling in love with you." And for the first time in her life, Hattie Blackwell, fat, mocked, underestimated, felt the world shift not from laughter at her expense, but because someone saw her worth so clearly it left no room for doubt. The first flakes fell in late May, far too early, far too heavy, far too cold. Captain Brock rode through camp shouting orders as a gray curtain of snow swallowed the prairie. "Circle the wagons! Get the fires covered! We need tents reinforced before the wind picks up!" The temperature dropped so quickly it stole breath from lungs. Children cried, horses stamped nervously. Frost formed on wagon spokes within minutes. Hattie pulled her shawl tighter and hurried to the Williamson wagon. Nathan was already there, loading bundles of kindling onto a tarp. "A spring blizzard," he muttered. "Worst kind, hits before people are ready for it." "What do we do?" Hattie asked, the wind ripping her words away. "Survive," Nathan said. "Same as always. But this time, we'll have to do it fast." By nightfall, the world was white and deadly. The cold seeped through every seam, every blanket, every layer of clothing. Fire sputtered in the whipping wind. Mothers clutched their children. Men huddled together, shaking violently. The snowstorm carved straight through flesh, bone, and hope. Hattie felt it too, her fingers numb, lungs burning. But underneath the cold sat something steady, something she carried all her life without knowing it was a gift. Her warmth, her insulation, her endurance. Children shivered violently, curling against their parents, only to find little comfort. Mrs. Williamson wept when her youngest's lips turned blue. Nathan saw it too, fear crawling up the faces of the families, the ragged breathing of the weakest members of the train. "People are going to freeze tonight," he said grimly. "Not if we help them," Hattie replied. "You mean you," Nathan corrected softly. "Your strength, your warmth, that's what can save them." Hattie felt a tremor roll through her. "I'll do whatever I can." She did not hesitate, not once. She climbed into the Williamson wagon and opened her arms. "Bring them," she said. Mrs. Williamson began with her 3 children, sobbing with relief as Hattie wrapped them under her coat, pressing them to her body. Her warmth spread quickly, melting their shivers into stillness. Word spread. Another mother arrived, her son's teeth chattering so violently he couldn't speak. Hattie took him too. Then 2 more children. Then a sick grandmother whose breath came shallow and thin. Then a young woman who'd collapsed just outside her wagon. Then a man with frostbite creeping along his fingers. By midnight, nearly a dozen people were pressed against Hattie's body, sharing her heat, taking the one thing everyone had mocked her for and using it to survive. Nathan checked on her constantly. "You're not overdoing it?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I'm warm. They need it more." Snow battered the canvas. Wind howled like something angry and hungry. The temperature kept dropping, but Hattie stayed warm. Nathan watched her with a reverence that bordered on painful. "You're saving them," he murmured. "Every single one." Hattie met his gaze. "You saved me first." His eyes softened. "Hattie, you were never the one needing saving." Hours passed. Snow piled high. Hope grew thin. But Hattie held strong, sweating beneath her layers while those pressed to her steady body slowly warmed, their breathing evening, their cries quieting. By dawn, the storm had passed. The camp was a frozen graveyard of white drifts and silent wagons, yet dozens of lives flickered with returning warmth because of her. When Hattie stepped out of the wagon, stiff and exhausted, the entire train turned toward her. Mothers ran to their children, weeping at the living warmth in their cheeks. Old men removed their hats. Men bowed their heads. Brock stood rooted, stunned. "You," he stammered. "You saved them. You saved this train." Hattie swayed on her feet, but Nathan was there, catching her immediately, pulling her against his chest. "She saved you," he told Brock. "All of you. The same woman you said wouldn't make it a single mile." Brock's face crumpled with shame. The entire train seemed to look at Hattie with new eyes, no longer seeing weight or burden or weakness, but endurance, warmth, strength, life. Nathan kept his arm around her, lowering his forehead to hers. "I told you," he whispered. "You were born for survival, and today you were the reason dozens survived." The snow glittered around them, blindingly bright under the morning sun. And for the first time in her life, Hattie Blackwell stood in the center of a crowd, not as a joke, not as an embarrassment, not as a burden, but as a savior. The storm receded, leaving the prairie silver and silent, an ocean of snow that glittered beneath the newborn sun. The wagon train stirred slowly, every movement stiff with cold and exhaustion. Fires were rebuilt, animals were checked, the wounded tended. But everywhere Hattie walked, people reached for her hands. Mothers clung to her shoulders, men bowed their heads as she passed. Children, warm, alive, saved, ran toward her with chapped cheeks and bright eyes. "Miss Hattie saved us. She kept me warm all night. She's like a big stove." Hattie laughed softly at that last one, despite the flush in her cheeks. Children had a way of telling the truth without cruelty. Captain Brock approached last, his hat crushed between trembling hands. The man who had dismissed her, mocked her, doubted her, now stood humbled. "Miss Blackwell," he said, voice scratching like gravel, "when you stepped onto this train in Missouri, I thought you'd be our downfall. I said harsh things, cruel things, and I believed every one of them." Hattie held his gaze, steady and calm. "I was wrong," Brock continued, swallowing hard. "You saved lives last night, more than I can count. Without you, we'd be burying children and elders right now. You carried this train through the storm." His throat tightened. "And I am sorry." She nodded, not with triumph, but with the quiet grace that was uniquely hers. "Thank you, Captain." When the last frozen wheel creaked free of the morning ice, the wagons rolled on, slower, wiser, shaken. The land grew softer as the days passed, the worst of the journey behind them at last. And by the time the first rooftops of Oregon City appeared against the purple shadow of the Cascades, the wagon train had already decided something. Hattie Blackwell was the heart that kept them alive. At the edge of town, Brock called one final gathering. People stepped down from their wagons, children clinging to their skirts and boots. "This has been the hardest crossing I've ever led," Brock announced. "But we made it because of one woman." He gestured toward Hattie. "She proved that strength isn't measured by thinness or speed. She proved that the person we judged the harshest was the one who saved us." Then he turned to her more softly. "Hattie Blackwell, thank you." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous, heartfelt, full of something close to awe. Nathan didn't clap. He stepped forward. "Hattie," he said, voice quieter than the wind, yet somehow carrying across the entire group. "I made you a promise back on the Kansas prairie that I'd help you finish this journey." He took her hands. But somewhere between the river and the storm, it stopped being a promise. It became my life. Her breath trembled. Nathan sank to one knee, the entire wagon train gasping behind him. "Hattie Blackwell," he said, "marry me. Come home with me to the mountains. Build a life with me, not because I protected you on this trail, but because you showed me what real strength looks like, because you saved people with nothing but your body heat and a heart bigger than this entire prairie, because I love you. His voice broke. Because I can't imagine a world without you in it. Tears blurred her vision. Nathan, yes, yes, I'll marry you. The cheer that rose shook the air. Nathan stood, lifting her easily, effortlessly into his arms, her laughter breaking open the sky. When he kissed her, it felt like the end of every cruel word ever spoken about her body and the beginning of a life built entirely on truth. Not thinness, not beauty, not perfection, but strength, warmth, worth, love. The wagon train had mocked her once. Now they wept for joy. Stories like Hattie's remind us that strength isn't always loud, beauty isn't always visible, and heroes aren't always the ones people expect. Every one of you listening comes from a different corner of the world, carrying your own battles, your own storms. But stories bind us across mountains, oceans, and miles of open sky. If this tale reached your heart even a little, tell me where you're listening from. Tell me what part stayed with you. And if you still believe love can rise from the harshest trials, stay close, because the next story is already waiting for you.